All right, well, welcome everybody to the Maryland Center for Brain Health in conjunction with A Mind for All Seasons. We are going to be talking today about supplements and helping to separate the science from the marketing hype and trying to navigate this often very confusing world of the supplements that are out on the market right now. My name is Lindsey McCormick. I'm the founder of the Maryland Center for Brain Health here in Frederick, Maryland. I've always been very, very passionate about changing lives and helping people to become the best that they can be. And I got very, very interested when I was working as a physical therapist assistant in working with my residents that had dementia and Alzheimer's and seeing the different changes that were happening in them and feeling like there had to be something else, something better out there to be able to help these people. And that's when I got involved with A Mind for All Seasons. Collett and Randy Vawdry created A Mind for All Seasons out in Boise, Idaho. Collett is the CEO, and he is a nationally recognized dementia expert. He's a licensed residential care administrator and a teacher at Boise State University and the College of Western Idaho. Randy Vawdry is a nurse practitioner with extensive experience in the hospital, skilled nursing, psychiatric care, and primary care settings. He's the chief architect of the enhanced protocol for A Mind for All Seasons, which is the primary protocol that we utilize. So, health and wealth. So many people nowadays are looking to improve their health. And oftentimes I think that we forget that our mind is related to the rest of our body and that a healthy mind resides in a healthy body. You can't have good wealth, but without good health, it's almost impossible to survive. So, a lot of us are out there seeking ways to improve our health and become the wealthiest that we could be by having the best health that we can have. And there's a lot of ways that we do this. Oftentimes, when we're trying to navigate improving our health, it can sort of feel like we're out on a ship on the ocean without an oar, without an anchor, just floating aimlessly in this sea of what do we do? Millions of nutrition advice coming from one direction, supplemental advice, advice from physicians, advice from friends, family members. We're constantly bombarded all day long with ways to improve our health, but it can be really daunting and really challenging to know, where do we start from? So there's a lot of different ways to optimize our health, and supplements are a really excellent way to do that. A lot of adults, about 77% of US adults right now, are taking supplements. But the big question is, do they need to be? Um, we have found that a lot of people are taking supplements and don't actually know why they are taking them. So our goal today is sort of help talk about different supplements that are out there and different tests that we can do to ensure that we are taking the right supplement at the right time in the right dosage to be able to optimize our health. Um, People spend so much money on supplements every year trying to improve their health, and we want to help you optimize that, help you optimize the right supplements to be taking so that you're not just basically throwing your money down the drain. It can be very, very daunting. I know that when I've gone to the supermarket and I have seen all those shelves full of supplements, it can be really, really challenging to look. You've got 20 different types of magnesium and, 30 different types of vitamin D. And, how do I know what to do or what to pick? How do I choose? It can be really, really overwhelming. A lot of people are very, very motivated to take control of their health, and supplements are a great way to do that, but oftentimes it feels like we're shooting in the dark. Oh, we read this article that says vitamin D is really good to take, so I'm going to go find a vitamin D supplement. What do I do? Which one do I take? Some of them are really expensive. Some of them are not so expensive. Do I want the more expensive one or the less expensive one? It can be very, very daunting to know where to begin. Um, but often the best place to begin is finding out where you're at already. If we don't know the levels that are inside our body, what is our vitamin D level? What is our vitamin E level? Are we missing certain nutrients? If we don't have that baseline of information, we're not going to know where to start. And it gives us a really good jumping off point to be able to navigate this crazy, crazy world of supplements. So I would love to turn it over to Eric Collett from A Mind for All Seasons, who's going to talk a little bit about, how supplements fit into brain health.
Thank you so much, Lindsey. You raised some really good points because it feels like most of the world takes some kind of dietary supplement. And yet, when I ask people, why are you taking this? They say, I don't know. I just heard that it was good for you. And you really start to raise the question of, are we aiming at a moving target, or are we just shooting blindly trying to hit something? Everybody has this general sense that they want to feel better, they want to be healthy, they want to live the longest, best quality life that they possibly can. And so a lot of times people are motivated to take things to try to improve their health. Yet if they don't know what that supplement is doing, or specifically why they're taking it, or if they're not tracking their results, then it becomes very tricky to know if it's money down the drain or just expensive urine, as Americans are criticized of having sometimes. And so Randy and I wanted to really take our our webinar today from the standpoint of where we've really done a lot of our work, which is in the world of brain health. So we're going to take what feels like just a little bit of a detour here, but it will really bring us around to understanding how supplements affect all of us and how we can be thoughtful in using them. So we want to tell you a few things, first of all, about Alzheimer's disease. There's 1 in 9 adults that are 45 and older that report some kind of cognitive decline, and 1 in 3 seniors that's currently dying with Alzheimer's disease or another type of dementia. And there are actually, this slide should be updated. There's actually over like 6.1, 6.2 million Americans and over 50 million people worldwide that are currently living with Alzheimer's disease. So that's pretty sobering to think that that many people are having major cognitive dysfunction. There is nothing that scares older adults more than Alzheimer's disease. And one of the motivators for people taking supplements is, well, I want to keep my brain and I want to stay sharp. So they'll see a supplement advertised that's got a bunch of different ingredients that are all supposed to improve brain health. And they say, oh, okay, maybe that's the answer. I'm going to take that. Does that really do any good? Is that money well spent? Well, to understand that, we have to understand a few things about how Alzheimer's disease works. You'll notice on this picture um, the hippocampus that's labeled right over here, kind of the bottom left part of the image here. And if you look at the actual image from a brain that was autopsied after Alzheimer's disease, you've got healthy brain and you have diseased brain over here. And on the disease side, you see this big crater where there should be a hippocampus, which is the memory control tower for your brain. Alzheimer's disease causes the brain to lose 50 to 70% of its mass. It is a devastating form of brain death. Neurodegeneration is technically what we'd call it. And as the brain is downsizing, no area seems to be hit harder than the memory center. That's ground zero for most Alzheimer's cases. Well, the interesting thing about that is that within the last 30 years, we've learned that the hippocampus actually produces new brain cells every day, about 700 for most people. How do you get to the point that the hippocampus is in the first to the 15th percentile if you measure it on an MRI and you check the volume of that structure? How does it get that small if it produces all these new brain cells every day? Well, it turns out that you're losing brain cells faster than they're being formed. There's a sort of switching mechanism in the brain. When it's flipped one way, the brain is normal and it's healthy and we maintain adult levels of functioning. And if it gets flipped the other way for a long time, the brain tends to downsize. So the brain is much more plastic than we previously thought. It can improve or it can degrade. There's no pharmaceutical magic for Alzheimer's disease. There have been a ton of trials, hundreds and hundreds of trials. We've spent billions of dollars trying to find a drug to cure Alzheimer's disease, and there's no magic pill. You can't get sick to that point and then pop a pill and all of a sudden be better. We may all want to show up at the doctor's office when we're not feeling well and get a prescription and go home knowing that we're going to get better. But there are certain diseases, lifestyle kinds of diseases, whether it's Alzheimer's or heart disease or type 2 diabetes or Parkinson's disease, where you can't get a drug that just makes everything all better. In fact, there are pharmaceutical companies that have quit researching Alzheimer's disease altogether because they've realized we're probably not going to be able to make a pill that will cure this. One researcher, Dr. Dale Bredesen from UCLA, has spent over 30 years studying Alzheimer's disease in the lab. And one of the things that he and his team at UCLA have recognized is that there are many, many different factors that determine whether or not a brain will be normal and maintain an adult, very healthy kind of brain structure, or whether it will start downsizing. And as he and his team have understood these switching mechanisms better, they've recognized that there are many factors that influence it. And you can't make one drug that deals with many factors. If you have 40 or 50 things that influence brain health, it's pretty tough to make one pill that deals with those things, especially considering the variations from one person to the next. So in 2014, he published the first of now a few papers showing a reversal of cognitive decline in a number of patients. How did they get this reversal? That idea of reversal and turning around Alzheimer's symptoms sounds crazy, but they actually used MRIs to measure the structure of the brains in some of these patients. And there were cases of people who went from the 17th percentile in the memory center of their brain up to the 75th percentile or greater. How did that happen? What did they do? Basically, they recognized that a brain with Alzheimer's is kind of like a roof with a lot of different holes in it. And instead of trying to develop a drug that's sort of like patching one hole in the roof and then expecting the roof to quit leaking, they did a bunch of blood work to measure all the nutrients and hormones and inflammatory markers and other factors that influence brain health. And then they set about addressing all of them. In other words, they used a multimodal approach. They measured the holes in the roof for each person and said, oh, you've got these 20 things. Here's your program. And for someone else, well, you've got these 30 things that are going wrong in your brain. Your vitamin D is off, your magnesium's off, your vitamin E is not very optimal, your B vitamins are toast, your sex hormones are not very good, your neurological hormones need some work. We need to get you exercising more. We need to improve your diet. Many different factors. And when they did that and stacked the therapies, that's when people really saw improvement. Over time, as Dr. Bredesen and his team have rolled this out with more and more people, and trained practitioners like Randy, our chief medical officer here at A Mind for All Seasons, who trained with Dr. Bredesen. And as Dr. Bredesen and our team at A Mind for All Seasons and many other practitioners around the world have applied these interventions, we've seen that what gets labeled Alzheimer's disease is not just one thing. People present differently. Some people have more of an inflammatory style of the disease. Some people really have as their predominant feature insulin resistance, glycotoxicity, we call it sometimes, where they just cannot respond well to insulin signaling and they are in a completely fuel deprived situation because they're not able to get sugar into the cells where it can be turned into energy. Some people really have an atrophic situation, an atrophy style dementia. This is where they're lacking nutrients and hormones. And then some people have more of a toxic style of dementia. They may not have the genetics for Alzheimer's disease, but they get it at a younger age. And they often don't present with memory loss right up front. They present with executive functioning problems. They can't plan and reason as well. Their judgment changes. Often they're diagnosed with mental health problems before anyone realizes, oh, they actually have Alzheimer's disease. Supplements can be helpful in any of these different conditions to calm inflammation, to improve the body's ability to metabolize sugar, to replace nutrients and hormones that are missing, and to help eliminate toxins from the body. So as Randy and I and our team at A Mind for All Seasons and at Maryland Center for Brain Health have used these types of approaches with those living with dementia, we have recognized that these approaches are helpful for anybody's brain. In fact, the most important thing that anybody can be doing by the time they're in their 40s or 50s is getting blood work done to figure out what is their metabolic health status. How are they doing overall in terms of the factors that dictate whether the brain is going to stay healthy and keep functioning in normal adult ways, or if it's going to start downsizing. Alzheimer's disease starts 10 to 20 years before symptoms even show up. So if we can intervene early and do the right thing soon and monitor a person's status throughout the rest of their life, then we have a extremely high likelihood of preventing Alzheimer's disease. In fact, Dr. Bredesen not too long ago said Alzheimer's disease should be as rare as leprosy. That's a pretty bold statement. Well, we're going to start shifting gears a little bit over to, we're going to turn the balance of our webinar over to Randy Vawdry, our Chief Medical Officer, who, as I mentioned earlier, actually trained a few years ago with Dr. Bredesen and has applied the techniques that he learned from him in hundreds and hundreds of patients. And we're going to explore whether individual supplements can strengthen the brain, and how does a person begin to make sense of the science versus all the marketing hype that's out there. Marketers are really good at preying on the fears that people have of losing their mind and saying, well, you've got to do this. And it turns out it's actually a little bit more complex than that. Supplements play a role, and we want to help you understand that role a little bit better. So Randy, I'll turn it over to you for the rest of our webinar here. We're excited to have you.
That's scary. I better forewarn everybody, if you're turning it over to me, this could get wild.
We're hanging on for the ride.
Eric and Lindsey, so glad to be with you and grateful to talk through supplements. I bring to the table this perspective of having used a very focused approach with specific supplements, some of which are not very common. Some you may not find at the local Walgreens or CVS pharmacy. But there's some research and studies that show they can really make a difference in cognitive health. So glad to be here. All right, so the first thing I want to do is offer a disclaimer, right? Because the FDA has not approved or validated the statements that I'm going to make today. These are clinical experience and case studies and opinion statements, but the FDA is very cautious about saying we use one thing to cure a disease or fix a disease, and that's not what I'm saying today. I'm going to share my clinical experience with how supplements may have adjusted or shifted the course of cognitive disorder in some of my own patients, okay? So starting out, everyone wants to know, are supplements safe? Can there be an adverse side effect or a risk or an interaction? And the answer is all of those things could happen. But I could also get struck by lightning. And that doesn't necessarily mean because something could happen that it always will happen. The Food and Drug Administration have given many of the supplements on the market a classification called GRAS, and it means they're generally recognized as safe. That the dosing and the strength and the application, the way it was formulated and so forth, when they use this supplement, is it enters the market and the average person could take them without any major side effects. Now, could there be minor side effects? Sure. And could there be interactions with medicines that people are currently taking? Yes, there could. Anytime that someone is preparing for surgery, they ask me, well, what supplement should I take heading into my surgery? And my answer is none. Withhold those supplements while you're going into surgery because you're going to be under anesthesia. You're going to be on medicines you're not usually on. So we don't want a risk of any potential interaction while you're snoozing on the surgical table, right? So sometimes we have to work through this. And when we talk about generally recognized as safe, we're going to talk through specific supplements where I always get the majority of my questions. And the big one when it comes to cognitive decline is Prevagen helpful for memory? Now that's pretty interesting, right? Because Prevagen has a proprietary ingredient that comes from jellyfish. And there was one clinical trial, and we've posted it up there. It was the Madison Memory Study, where they double blinded. That means they gave one group of individuals the supplement, and another group, which was the placebo group, did not get the supplement, but neither of them knew. And then after a period of time, they flipped the group. So they continued giving one Prevagen and the other group, or excuse me, they flipped the group. So the group that got the placebo now got Prevagen and vice versa. And then they looked at various clinical trials, and I won't go through them in details, but the cognitive measures are listed down there on the bottom right, where they looked at some shopping list questionnaires and things that would cause people to remember what they were shopping for at the grocery store, and they showed some modest improvement. Now, the challenge is that that study was conducted by the company. And so some people would argue there's a little bit of bias there, right? They were motivated to show improvement, and it has not been validated by other companies or by third-party independent researchers. So I always walk away from the table and say, does it work? Well, the company says it works phenomenal. How about everyone else taking it? I've had some people say they notice a difference, and I've had other of my patients say they didn't quite notice that it made a big difference. And Prevagen's a little bit more expensive than the standard supplement. So again, we're going to finish the conversation on Prevagen, but I'll leave it up to you to decide if you think that it makes a huge difference. The next thing that I want to talk about, there's a supplement called Focus Factor. It's sold at Sam's Club, Walmart, it's sold at Costco. Many of these companies sell Focus Factor, and they specifically set it up as a brain supplement. And you'll see at the bottom of the screen, this is one you can get in many locations. Now, something very nice about Focus Factor is it does have some supplements that have been shown in small clinical trials to make a difference. I think that's one of its strengths. However, one of the weaknesses of Focus Factor is that the more supplements that you try to pack into one, the lower the dosing of each of those individual supplements. And so if you have 10 ingredients, you have to have smaller amounts of that ingredients, or the pill size is going to be this big and there's no way you could choke it down. So Focus Factor, I think, has some promise, but I think the weakness of Focus Factor is that the dosing of each of the individual components might be a little too low to make a big difference. However, as I'm talking about case studies and clinical experience, I've had some patients that take it and they say, wow, I think it really has made a difference. So again, that varies from individual to individual. And I think on the next slide, it talks about what some of those ingredients are. Here we go. The first one that I've underlined is Bacopa monnieri extract. That actually has been shown to help improve cognitive function and support synaptogenesis, which is the transmission of nerve impulses. Phosphatidylserine is an amino acid that also supports neurons and synapses, specifically in the brain and in cell membranes. Tyrosine, that N-acetyltyrosine, has often been used, and I have used this in individuals with attention deficit disorder. It helps to improve attention and focus when focusing on a specific task that you have to do. So I've used it in kids that need a little bit of focus and don't want to take a pharmaceutical stimulant. Tyrosine can help make a difference. The gamma aminobutyric acid, that's a big mouthful of words. Oftentimes it's pronounced GABA or GABA, G-A-B-A, is something that lowers anxiety. And many individuals who have a little bit of anxiousness, say when they have to give a webinar like what we're giving, or do a public speaking engagement, or they're going out in a social crowd and they're kind of nervous about how they're going to be perceived by the friends or people that they don't know, and there's a little bit of peer pressure. GABA helps lower anxiety levels, and we've used that. Anyone out there who's used the famous drugs like Ativan or Xanax or Klonopin, those medications fire and trigger on GABA receptors. And so you can actually get GABA over the counter, and it's in Focus Factor. Finally, the last ingredient there, called Huperzine A. Huperzine A is the over-the-counter or supplemental equivalent to donepezil, or the pharmaceutical agent called Aricept. And Huperzine A has been engaged in clinical trial and has been shown to increase levels of an amino acid in the brain called choline, and that has shown promise and benefit in individuals with cognitive disorders. So I would give focus factor a better grade than I would give Prevagen, simply because that many of the ingredients in this supplement have clinical trials behind them for improving cognitive function. Now, once again, the disadvantage is that some of these may be used in small enough amounts that an individual may not have a big impact. So for example, you might simply do better with a much larger dose of GABA or phosphatidylcholine or phosphatidylserine. And so when you're using it in a supplement where those things have been grouped together in smaller amounts, some people may not have as much benefit if they just took the supplement in a much higher dose. So that's my point. Dosing actually matters. And if you, on that back slide, Eric, don't go back to it, but my point to that is many times I'll encourage an individual to buy the individual ingredients of focus factor and use them. It's a little bit more expensive to do it that way, but we can be focused and be very deliberate in deciding what we think an individual might need and benefit from, and use that in higher doses and watch for the outcomes. So it's kind of a bonus to do it that way. So all of the patients that I take care of, when I'm providing them a supplement recommendation, I always encourage them, I want you to take this supplement for a month or two, and then let's visit. Let's talk about how you're doing and are you feeling better? It is not uncommon for people to call me back and say, Randy, I do think I'm doing better. I feel like I'm a little bit more crisp. I'm a little bit more in the moment. My memory's gotten better. I'm not driving my spouse crazy by asking the same question 16 times in the morning. I actually feel like I'm starting to do a little bit better. So it's kind of fun to have those experiences. Eric talked a little bit about some of the root causes of cognitive decline, and one of them is that there are deficiencies in vitamins and minerals. Now, that's intuitive. Almost everyone knows when certain vitamin and minerals drop below a threshold value that the brain probably just isn't going to work as well. And many of these are not synthetic per se, but they're derived from plants, and they've been studied. They've been shown in clinical trials. Some of these are with animals and some of these are with humans, that there has been improved neurological signaling. And so this is what we want to talk about when we're talking about the root causes of cognitive decline. I think that during the COVID pandemic, everyone heard on multiple fronts, news organizations, social media, friends and families, that B vitamins and vitamin D actually matters. And there's a raging debate out there about what the best way to get vitamin B is. Vitamin Bs come in animal products, and folic acid specifically comes in leafy greens. And so I hear people all the time saying, well, it's a lot better to get your folic acid from leafy greens. And if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, you might choose to do that. Others would make the argument that the B vitamins are in a little bit different form when they come in an animal protein. And so it's far better to get them from things like animal products like salmon or cod or dairy products or beef. And so I don't want to get into that raging debate about where the best place to get them, your B vitamins from, but I do want to talk about their benefits. So Eric, if you'll hit advance that, there's something that will show up in the very middle. Each of the B vitamins, we call them B complexes because they're filled with many different nutrients. And so I've tried to outline these here. Thiamine is vitamin B1, and it's almost always diminished in individuals who consume alcohol. Now, you don't have to be a raging alcoholic to have an insufficient level of vitamin B1, but you can slowly whittle that down. And I think that you got to be thoughtful about that. You got to be careful because thiamine's involved in many chemical reactions in the body. Riboflavin and niacin, B2 and B3, also essential for chemical reactions. Riboflavin is actually very, very helpful in cognitive function. Niacin has been talked about a million times in its ability to help optimize cholesterol. Now, just taking niacin by itself can oftentimes result in a flush. I've had some people that say, oh my gosh, I take a big dose of niacin, I feel like I'm allergic to it because my skin gets red and hot. I start getting flushed, I get this palpitation, and I get tingling all over my body. And I say, yeah, that is the niacin flush. There's been many a times where I'll take a niacin 30 minutes before I get in the sauna because I want to drive that blood right to the superficial part of my skin. And I want to get that flush so I can sweat it out and help with detox. Pantothenic acid has been studied and really makes a difference in attention and focus. And so you'll find that in many of the supplements for individuals that have ADD. Pyridoxine, vitamin B6, in its natural form is called pyridoxine 5-phosphate, and it is involved in detox reactions. It helps lower homocysteine levels and improve methylation status in the body. Women seem to be more dialed into vitamin B7 or biotin because it helps skin and hair and nails to grow, right? We get healthier, our skin seems to be better. And in science, our nails are part of our skin and our hair does better. My 20-year-old daughter has taken biotin often, and she'll always say, Dad, I want my hair to get long and beautiful. And so I always take biotin. And I talked to her yesterday on the phone. She's still taking biotin on a regular basis. Eric and I are huge fans of vitamin B9, which is folic acid, and B12, which is cobalamin. Now, we don't recommend B9 and B12 in the forms listed there, folic acid and cobalamin. Those are actually synthetic versions that the body would have to convert to the active form. We recommend them in forms of L-methylfolate and either methylcobalamin or hydroxycobalamin. And we are very intentional about the supplements that we recommend when trying to supplement with B vitamin 9 and 12. In fact, most women are also familiar with the importance of a prenatal vitamin because vitamin B9 helps to prevent neural tube defects in a developing fetus. And I would submit to our audience that it's no difference as we age. We need high doses of L-methylfolate and vitamin B9 to strengthen the brain so that the brain can continue to age very gracefully. So you can see from our discussion how important B vitamins are, specifically for focus, cognition, attention, and improving synaptic function and neuronal function in the brain. This is a supplement that I often recommend for individuals who want to take a very high quality B vitamin. It costs somewhere between about $30 and $35 depending on the strength that you'll get, but you'll see that each of these say, except for the one on the left, Methyl-Pro has a B complex, so it lists all of those complexes in the B vitamin group that I just talked about. Plus, there's a relatively high dose of L-methylfolate, which is that active form of folic acid that helps strengthen the brain and helps the brain to age very gracefully. And when I use the term methylated, I often refer to the fact that it's an activated form of B vitamin the body can readily absorb and then utilize for chemical reactions that occur. All right. Now, vitamin D, super important. During the COVID pandemic, everyone's talking about vitamin D. And I hear people all the time say, oh, I take vitamin D. You're right. Vitamin D is so valuable. It influences about 900 gene expressions in the human body. Vitamin D in many areas of science is actually considered a hormone or a prohormone, that it interacts with the receptor on the neuron of a cell, and then that prohormone enters the neuron and changes the way that the expression of our DNA happens. Now, many of my patients will say, I already take a vitamin D supplement. And my next question is, well, then we need to check your vitamin D. It's not enough to just take it. It's more important to know what your level is. The second part of that is, what form do you take? Vitamin D2 is the primary form that comes in plants, and D3 is the primary form that comes in animals. So those fatty fish, the salmon, liver. Vitamin D3 is actually considered an animal prohormone versus vitamin D2, which comes from plants. And in the science arena, we think that vitamin D3 actually raises your cholecalciferol levels a little bit higher, which is the active form of vitamin D that our body needs. And so if you're taking a vitamin D, I think it's best practice to take vitamin D3 and recognize that it's fat soluble, which means you don't absorb it very well unless you're taking it with fat in your diet. So you might have it with a little bit of butter or a little bit of dairy fat if you eat dairy. If you don't eat dairy, you might have it with a little bit of protein. It's an animal product where you have fat with it, or take it with your olive oil. So it just seems to be absorbed a little bit better. And it's not uncommon that people will take vitamin D and check their levels and they're still a little low because it's just not absorbed very well unless you have fat in your diet. So you have to pay close attention to that. How do you know if vitamin D is working or if your supplements are working? Well, it's hard. Some people will say, oh my gosh, I just feel better when I take vitamin D and my levels go up. Many people are not as intuitive. They may not feel specifically better with that vitamin supplement. And so I always encourage people to check your levels. We want your levels to be at greater than 50 and not necessarily anything higher than about 80 or 90. That's that sweet spot in physiology where vitamin D seems to have its biggest impact. There you go. There's my levels, right? Well, can taking supplements hurt you? As I mentioned before, there are thresholds where if supplements get too high, it could create a challenge. So let's talk about them in the context of vitamin D. As I left those threshold levels 50 to 80, I was with a chiropractor and a functional neurologist last Friday, and he says he'll drive people up into 100, and then their doctors panic. Oh my gosh, you don't want to have it into the hundreds. And I said to him, you know what? 100 really is my threshold. I'm thoughtful about that. I don't see that there's a lot more benefit to drive their vitamin D level to 120 or 150. The reason being is that when that level starts creeping that high, you'll start to see elevated levels of parathyroid hormone, and individuals might be at greater risk for a kidney stone or increased calcification. And I think the whole world is overcalcified. So we got to be careful about that. The last thing I would want someone to do is get a kidney stone because they're taking enormous levels of vitamin D and they're not paying attention to their level. We do know from science that there doesn't seem to be any specific benefit beyond that threshold that I've given you. So from a cognitive standpoint, we like 50 to 100, but people don't get smarter by having a vitamin D level of 120. So be thoughtful about that. As you drive these levels much higher, there's a risk of a challenge. Vitamin E is one of those that also has a threshold limit. Vitamin E tends to be a little bit thinning when it comes to our blood. So think of all of the people who already take a blood thinner. You might take Xarelto or Eliquis or Coumadin. Maybe you take an aspirin on a regular basis because your goal is to make it so your blood doesn't clot so quickly. Maybe you have atrial fib or you've had a history of a DVT. Vitamin E also has a sweet spot, and that sweet spot is somewhere between 12 and 20 micrograms. And when I check people's vitamin E levels, which Eric and Lindsey know, every single one of my patients gets a vitamin E level checked. We don't want to see that vitamin E level at 35 and 40. That starts pushing them into the place that they're going to get some bruising or a little bit more thinning of the blood. Now, if a level was that high, it's probably not the end of the world, but you have to be thoughtful about what else you're taking. What if you're taking an omega-3? That also will thin the blood. So you have to look at vitamin E in the totality of the other supplements that you might be taking. I love vitamin E from the standpoint that it's a powerful antioxidant and it helps strengthen our cell membranes. Everyone talks about the power of magnesium. And there was a remarkable book written by Carolyn Dean. She's a physician, a regular conventionally trained doctor, and a naturopathic doctor. She currently lives in Hawaii, and she's written this great book called The Magnesium Miracle. And she talks about the tremendous benefits of magnesium. And when you check a magnesium level, that first line at the very top says Mag RBC. When you check magnesium, if you want a sensitive reading, you need to check the magnesium RBC level. And labs get this wrong all the time. I can tell you, I'm working with a group out of Washington that checked a bunch of magnesium levels, and they all came back as serum mag levels. And I could tell by how low the levels were. Magnesium resides primarily inside of the cell. It's intracellular. So if you check a serum magnesium level, you're checking all of the magnesium that lives outside of our cells in the bloodstream. And that's not a very sensitive level. It's generally only going to be low if you have cardiac problems. So for example, if you go into cardiac arrest or you go into the ER and you're having a heart attack, they almost always hook you up to an IV magnesium drip because we need that magnesium as a calming agent. It will calm the heart down so that it slows the nature of that ischemic event in a heart attack. But it's also essential for neuroplasticity, and it helps improve brain function. When I'll put on there a caution if you take it with calcium, it's not that it's danger if you take it with calcium. The problem is that calcium and magnesium have a very similar charge. The ionic charge in calcium and magnesium is the same, and so those two will compete for absorption. When your body's looking to bind for that ionic charge, it's not going to recognize, oh, I'm going to bind with magnesium in lieu of calcium. It's just magnetic. It's just going to connect those molecules together based on charge. And so taking CalMag together functionally would give you less magnesium than it would give you if you just took magnesium by itself, okay? And I'm also very thoughtful about the form of magnesium. And before Eric goes to the next slide, let me point out, when you check magnesium, you always check a magnesium RBC, and you want that level to be greater than 5.2. If it's lower than that, you can essentially assume that your total body magnesium is too low and you need to raise that dosing. Magnesium comes in many different forms. It almost always comes as a salt, which means that we bind magnesium to another molecule, like a sulfite molecule or a chloride molecule or an oxide. When you buy it as a salt, it tends to relieve constipation, which is a huge deal. We don't want the pipes to be all plugged up because that doesn't feel very good. But at the same time, if it's designed to help things move through the bowel a little bit better, it's not going to be absorbed quite as well as if you took it as a chelate. A chelate means that we don't bind it to a salt, we bind it to an amino acid. And it comes in many different forms. You can get it in a magnesium threonate, which you can see under that Neuromag. It's called Neuromag. That's a kind of a marketing ploy, but we think that it gets absorbed into the body and has access to the brain tissue far better than a salt because it's attached to a threonate amino acid. I often also recommend magnesium glycinate. Now, these supplements are not way more expensive, but they tend to be absorbed a little bit better. So you got to ask yourself the question, am I taking this magnesium supplement because I can't poop and I got to have better bowel movements? Or am I taking this magnesium supplement because I want it to find access into my brain with a little bit better ease, and therefore I've got to take it in a chelate? So those are two questions to ask yourself when it comes to magnesium. Not to say that one's better than the other, they just have different purposes. I always get asked the question, well, what about a probiotic, Randy? Do you think I should take a probiotic? And the answer often is you bet. I think probiotics make a difference, especially if you have any form of gut health. Now, I got to tell you a fun story. This just happened within the month. Eric and I have a client that came to us with cognitive dysfunction. And I had the patient fill out a very long questionnaire before we started and ask questions. Do you have irritable bowel? Do you have diarrhea? Do you have constipation? Do you have any gut issues? Do you have acid reflux? And there was probably 12 questions about gut health. And the patient said, no, I got none of that. And then when Eric sat down with her, she says, Eric, the one thing I want to do is, what are we going to do for my gut? And Eric called me and says, Randy, we missed helping this lady improve her gut. And I said, well, how did I miss that? Gosh, I must not be very smart. So we opened up her health history and she didn't answer any questions. And I said, Eric, she didn't answer any questions. And Eric says, well, she says she has belly pain. And I read through my questions and realized I didn't say, do you have any gut issues like irritable bowel, diarrhea, constipation, gastroparesis, acid reflux, and belly pain? And because I missed that descriptor, she said she didn't have it. And I realized, oh my goodness, I really have to get better at asking those questions on paper, because this lady has belly pain after every time she eats. She's thin as a rail and does not feel good because her gut hurts. And so that was a fail on my part, but it shows you how dynamic this interactions can be with individuals with a little bit of cognitive decline and that relationship with their healthcare provider. So with that story being told, I'm going to talk about a way that we can help condition our bowel. Probiotics are the rage right now in advertising. Everyone talks about the value of probiotics. I'm going to tell you what my opinion is, and everyone has an opinion. So my opinion may not be that valuable. It's just born out of my clinical experience, but here it is. The value of a probiotic is 100% dependent on its ability to get that probiotic to the distal colon. Here's what that means. Your colon starts when food leaves the stomach into the small intestine. And so your bowel is like 25 feet long. It goes small intestine, duodenum, jejunum, then you get to the cecum, and you get to the ascending, transverse, and descending colon. You got this big long tube. Well, all of the bacteria in your bowel typically resides in the colon, which is the last 5 feet. And so a probiotic has value if it can make it to the last 5 feet of your colon and it's still intact. And it's got an obstacle course because it's got to get through your stomach with stomach acid and digestive enzymes. It's got to get through the bile salts and that whole digestive process that just churns and burns through the small intestine. And oftentimes probiotics are not formulated in a robust format enough so that they can make it to the last 5 feet of your colon and set up shop. This is my favorite probiotic. It's called Microbiome Labs is the manufacturer, and it's a spore. And if you know anything about spores, they can live through the zombie apocalypse, right? A spore is wrapped in this capsule that remains protected. If it can last 50 years outside in the dirt through the cold and the rain, and it waits until the conditions are right, and then that spore will open up like a seed and release that probiotic into the environment. And Microbiome Labs have conducted at least 2 clinical trials that have been randomized and placebo-controlled and crossed over and showed that this particular probiotic successfully gets to the location we want it to be, and it helps lower something called LPS. I don't know that we have time to talk about LPS, but it is one toxic mother, and it's going to wreak havoc in the human body if you can't control for it. So here's my favorite probiotic because of its delivery. And then it does include 5 species of really nice probiotics like Saccharomyces boulardii and Akkermansia, and a handful that are big, huge words that are hard for me to say at 6 o'clock in the morning. Okay. What about prebiotics? Well, let me tell you, a prebiotic is different from a probiotic because it's not bacteria. It's actually the food of the bacteria that our gut likes to eat. So we know that a diet rich in plants, rich in fibers makes a huge difference. Well, Microbiome Labs taught a continuing ed course that says, look, if you eat the wrong probiotics, you're just going to feed the wrong bacteria. Or if your diet consists of Ho-Hos and Oreos every day, you're just going to feed the junk that's in your gut. And so we want to be very thoughtful and intentional about what probiotics are we going to use. And this particular probiotic has non-digestible oligosaccharides that feed those keystone bacteria that are included in the probiotic that I just showed you. So it really helps reinforce gut health for long-term success. And then finally, what about repairing and rebuilding the GI mucosa? When we inflame our GI tract, it's probably the #1 cause of all of those irritable bowel symptoms is this inflammatory response that gets in the gut. And megamucosa is something that includes 4 key amino acids. So proline, serine, threonine, and cysteine, which are very, very valuable. Eric knows my favorite supplement in the world is N-acetylcysteine. And so this has a very high dose of cysteine in it to help produce glutathione. But the second part of that is it actually takes antibodies called IgG or IgA, and these come from cattle. So these are called bovine IgGs, and it puts it in our gut to mop up those polysaccharides or those lipopolysaccharides, LPS, that are floating around our gut, just wreaking havoc. And that's a mouthful too. There's a lot of science in what I just said, and we probably don't have time to get through it. But remember, fixing the gut is more than just taking a probiotic. You got to take the right probiotic. You've got to have some great prebiotics with resistant starches and soluble and insoluble fibers. And then oftentimes you got to mop up all the bad characters that are in there with a little bit of IgG. And finally, this has a nice dose of some bioflavonoids, which are antioxidants. Shifting gears from the gut, let's talk about insulin resistance. In my experience, most people with any chronic disease also have some element of metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is when our body just doesn't respond very well to the production of our own insulin. It's almost like we don't recognize it or we turn the volume down. The body's pumping out massive amounts of insulin, and our muscle cells are a little bit snotty and they roll their eyes and are like, I'm not hanging out with you because I don't like insulin anymore, right? You fell outside of my friend group. We need insulin, and we need insulin sensitivity to maintain good health. And there's a beautiful herb called berberine, which is a very high antioxidant that helps improve insulin resistance. Now, berberine, in my opinion, could be considered the natural form of metformin. About 1 in 4 people who take metformin get terrible diarrhea and upset stomach. I don't see that same thing happening with berberine. Now, that's my clinical experience. That's not a statement that the FDA approves, but I'll tell you, if you have insulin resistance and you've struggled with your blood sugars, berberine would be something that you could consider and try to see if it helps improve that, because I've had fantastic results with it. And there's lots of really nice studies about berberine. When you combine berberine with alpha lipoic acid, things get even better. So all of my clients with some level of insulin resistance get a prescription from me to take berberine and alpha lipoic acid. Now, I did a Google search. So if you just want to type into the Google, what is alpha lipoic acid? This is exactly what pops up in the first window. It says, while most of the research in alpha lipoic acid in diabetes is focused on the effects of neuropathy, several clinical trials have now found that alpha lipoic acid may increase insulin sensitivity and help reduce blood sugars and cholesterol or lipids, largely through improving measures of oxidative stress and inflammation. That's really cool. This study, this supplement has been around for 50 years, and there are a gazillion clinical trials showing that it helps as an antioxidant, a detox supplement, and with diabetes. And I cannot figure out why it's not used more often. As I mentioned, in conjunction with berberine, it does amazing things for people with insulin resistance. How about those with chronic pain syndrome? We live in an epidemic of chronic pain. I think it's just as severe as COVID pandemic, and there's probably been more lives taken by accidental overdoses of people on chronic narcotic therapy trying to find relief from chronic pain syndromes. I'm not exaggerating. It's a terrible challenge in our age. And so I wanted to give you a little clinical pearl and nugget about how to reduce chronic pain with some natural supplements. This particular supplement called Curamin, produced by a company named Terry Naturally, was in a head-to-head trial against a common anti-inflammatory called Celebrex. Now, those of you who know what an anti-inflammatory is, ibuprofen and Motrin, Aleve, naproxen, these are anti-inflammatories. There's a very good prescription strength anti-inflammatory called Celebrex, and this company was so confident in the supplement that they did a third-party trial where they did, here's a group that took Celebrex and here's a group that took this supplement called Curamin, and they followed them for a period of time, and then they crossed them over, and neither group knew what they were taking. Okay, so this was a really good trial. And then they had them rate pain scales. Curamin did just as well as the prescription strength Celebrex in the clinical trial, right? And so the nice thing about Curamin is it doesn't have the same GI risks of burning a hole in your stomach as all the anti-inflammatories do. So we don't have the challenges associated with terrible acid reflux and peptic ulcer disease. And so all of my clients with terrible pain syndromes, I usually recommend this name brand or this cocktail, which is a combination of boswellia and curcumin together. And other companies now are starting to produce this same compound for the treatment of chronic pain. I've had beautiful results with it. There is a little bit of a challenge that this could create an upset stomach, right? So some people can't tolerate it very well, but that's more of a sensation. We don't think it creates peptic ulcers, but I think it's definitely worth a try. So if you have chronic pain, you might go buy a bottle and see how you feel. And if you're like many of my clients with rheumatoid arthritis and fibromyalgia and just a lot of achiness, you might find a huge difference. So let's wrap up with a little bit of discussion. I want to finish with this, and then I'm going to turn the time back over to Lindsey and Eric if they want to ping pong some questions back and forth. The term supplements mean that they're supplemental to. That means that no one's plan of health should just be take a handful of supplements every day, and then we're going to go eat at the local fast food restaurant and eat frankenfood that's just going to inflame our joints and cause irritable bowel anyway. Supplements complement a healthy diet. And so if you're eating like crap, clean up your eating and you'll probably notice a difference. And then if you have very focused problems, Lindsey and Eric and I might be able to help you find a supplement program that helps complement a healthy diet to improve your symptoms. Linz, what do you got to say about all that?
I think that was fantastic, Randy. I really appreciate you and Eric both coming on and talking about this. I think it's an incredibly important discussion because it is an area that a lot of people don't know a lot about. And, like both of you said, we see recommendations, we hear something, oh, that sounds really good. Let me try that. And we really don't know what we're taking. And I have definitely been guilty of that in the past. Oh, I have this issue and I want to fix it. And let me see if I can take this pill and it'll help. And it's a lot of it's just blind. Like, we don't know what we're doing. We don't know what we're taking. We don't know if it's effective or not. And I think that, talking about testing is incredibly important and just find out what's going on in your body. I think too often, um, we don't want to go to the doctor. We don't want to, hear anything bad or negative that's happening with our health, but prevention is, the best cure. And if we can really be attuned to our bodies and know what's going on with them and know our levels, we can appropriately help them supplement and, use that as an addition to improving their health. Like you said, it shouldn't be the main thing that we're doing. We shouldn't only be supplementing. We've really got to clean up a lot of areas, exercise, nutrition, mental health, what we're doing. And so really the supplement should just be that. It should be a supplement. It shouldn't be the main thing that we're doing. I did have a couple of people ask me some questions that couldn't make the webinar today. I had several people actually ask me about ADHD. I know you mentioned that a couple of times throughout the webinar, but do you have anything else that you could say about that regarding supplements that might be beneficial for that, or taking supplements for ADHD versus conventional medications?
Of course, that's a great question. Thank you. And let me start my question by saying Eric actually introduced me to a book called Healing ADD by a physician named Dr. Daniel Amen. And Daniel Amen did the same thing Dr. Bredesen did by taking ADD and breaking it down into subtypes. So just like Eric talked about subtypes of dementia, there are subtypes of ADD. I found his book just remarkably instructive for healthcare providers and patients. In that book, he outlines some very specific supplement recommendations for individuals. And at the top of the list was L-tyrosine and D-L-phenylalanine, DLPA. These supplements are precursors to the production of dopamine. And Lindsey, as you know, individuals who take Vyvanse or Adderall, these are medicines that cause an increased level of dopamine in the brain. So when you take tyrosine and phenylalanine, you're actually increasing the building blocks for those supplements. And then the hope is that those supplements will spill over into the production of dopamine and improve cognitive function. Now, if you jumped in my pickup truck with me, sitting in the console of my pickup truck, I have a bottle of DL-phenylalanine. It's just sitting there. And where the typical individual might, in the middle of the day, feel a little bit of a blah, I'm getting bogged down, and I'm going to go buy me a Coke and get a little bit of caffeine and a little bit of sugar, I'll walk out to my pickup truck and take a capsule of DL-phenylalanine that just kind of helps perk me up. It really makes a difference for me. So that's a very simple, inexpensive, nice starting place for individuals with attention deficit disorder.
Fantastic. Thank you, Randy.
Mhm.
I also got a question about anxiety
Nice.
and
So,
what,
like, what supplements would help for anxiety?
yes.
Okay, that is a really good question. So when I sit down and talk with individuals about anxiety, I got to try to figure out, are they male or female? Because that makes a difference in my recommendations. In a very general sense, right? It's hard to talk about every scenario exactly the same because they're never exactly the same. Are we talking about a 20-year-old or a 50-year-old? Are we talking about a menopausal or a non-menopausal person? My first line defense against anxiety is to always optimize hormones. Now, that's not a supplement, that's actually a prescription medicine because
Mhm.
when we optimize hormones in women, they all do better and the anxiety drops. Now, there are some supplements that have shown tremendous benefit with anxiety. Threonine is one, rhodiola is another one, lemon balm is one. I talked in the summary about GABA, GABA. That's one. You've probably heard about tryptophan.
Mhm.
That is another supplement. And I've also learned that anxiety is often the result of other unmet problems. So maybe a person has blood sugar that is wildly out of control, and when an individual feels their blood sugar going from 170 down to 100, that drop in blood sugar does not feel good, and individuals will say, oh my gosh, I get anxious during the day, and so they tend to jump to the emotional foods because that will raise their blood sugar. Some people just simply take too much caffeine, and if we lower that, the palpitations go away, and indeed that goes away. I was visiting with a very close friend yesterday, and we talked about the power of deep breathing, and that is free of charge. But sometimes when we get anxious, we get kind of welled up, and we take these small, short breaths. So that's a little bit more complex, and it's very different from individual to individual. But those 5 supplements that I gave are good starting places if an individual wanted to figure out how to tone down anxiety and they didn't have access to optimizing their hormones and they're eating really clean and their blood sugar's under control. Those are good places to start.
Wonderful.
Randy,
Thank
if I can jump in with just a couple of thoughts, you kind of hinted at this, but oftentimes you have to be just as thoughtful about what you quit doing in your life as what you start
you.
doing and add in supplementally. So you mentioned caffeine, for example. I think a lot of people forget that the half-life of caffeine is somewhere around 6 hours, which means that 12 hours later, you've still got like a quarter of the caffeine in your system. So if you're taking caffeine by midday or even later in the day, then you can have this really wonky effect that comes up at night. Caffeine blocks adenosine receptors, and adenosine allows us to feel really tired. But it's also kind of a cyclical thing triggered by our circadian rhythms. When it gets dark, our body's producing this adenosine and helping us feel tired. And if you're blocking those receptor sites with caffeine that is still in your system hours later, the adenosine's still going to build up. It just has nowhere to go until your body metabolizes all the caffeine. So what happens the next morning? Well, the caffeine has worn off and you get hit and slammed with this adenosine surge. And so even though you slept most of the night, you still feel really crummy the next morning. Well, anxiety and depression go hand in hand. And if you wake up feeling just sluggish and you don't have a lot of energy because of that adenosine surge, then you may feel these depressive symptoms, which may trigger more anxiety, and you just feel like your life is falling apart. And so what do? You have like 3 cups of coffee to try to wake up, and you start this cycle all over again. And sometimes just dialing that back and peeling away the layers of what's causing a person problems makes a huge difference for them. Alcohol's another thing. I recently listened to a lecture from Dr. Matthew Walker at UC Berkeley, who's a sleep expert. And he pointed out that just 1 glass of alcohol at night will completely booger up your body's ability to get into REM sleep. And you will wake up feeling terrible because you slept, but you did not get deep sleep. I think that ties in with the whole anxiety, depression axis that we're dealing with here.
I
Hey,
agree, Eric.
Lindsey, can I share just one
Yeah,
recent
absolutely.
experience? I don't want to dominate the conversation. I have a close friend that called me the other day and said, Randy, I'm just struggling to get through the end of the school year. COVID has just been a total disaster. It's so hard to be a school teacher, and I am just not doing well. Can you recommend a different anti-anxiety, antidepressant medicine, whatever? I mean, I don't know how I'm going to get through the end of the year. I just wake up every day in panic mode, and I'm sleeping okay. I'm trying. She just went through this litany of things. I'm exercising. I'm eating really good. I can't. I mean, I'm all messed up. I'm going to end up in a psychiatric institute. What can you help me with? And so we talked about the medicine she's on. She's been on an antidepressant, anti-anxiety medicine for probably 10 years. And I said, well, I'm cautious about making a choice. Why don't we just try a little progesterone? And she's like, well, what's progesterone? Is that female hormone, right? And I talked with her about it, and then we started it. And then I kind of expected to hear from her. I didn't hear from her. About a week later, I sent her a text message and said, hey, I'm just wanting to check in on you. I know that we're kind of nearing the end of the school year. Are you doing okay? And her response back to me was like, oh my gosh, where have you been my whole life? This is the most amazing thing. I can't tell you how much better I feel. I don't wake up feeling like my heart's going to pound out of my chest. I don't know what this medicine's doing or how it works, but this is amazing. And so it goes back to my discussion about anxiety can be really tricky because it can be driven by hormones, and just optimizing hormones can make a huge difference in women.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. And I think that that is kind of the importance of what we're doing, and why I think, A Mind for All Seasons and the Maryland Center for Brain Health are very valuable resources, because we do take a look at all of that, right? Like, people come to us and we will get their whole history, and we'll do the labs, and we'll figure out what is going on underneath to be able to really target these treatments and these supplements, and all the other different modalities and therapies that we have to go along with it. So I really, really appreciate both of you coming on. I know it was so early in the morning out in Idaho, and I really appreciate you both. You've been a wealth of information, as you always are, and I know that I definitely learned a lot. I always learn a lot on these webinars as well. And I invite people, if you have questions, or you want a consultation, or you have different things going on within your brain health that you just want to have somebody take a look at and see what you can do to improve that, give us a call. If you're out on the West Coast, check out Eric and Randy. And if you're out here on the East Coast, look me up. All my contact information is here. You can go to our website at mdbrainhealth.com, and we would be incredibly happy to help you out on wherever you're at in your journey right now.
All right. Thanks so much, Lindsey, for having us on. We We always appreciate the chance to be with you, and you're always a great host. So hope everybody has a great rest of their day.
Yes, thank
Thanks,
you so
guys.
much. Thank you both. Have a wonderful rest of your day.